Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. I'm honored this afternoon to be talking with Judge Lerner-Wren, who presides over the first mental health court in Broward County. Judge Wren pioneered the first problem-solving court and is here today to share some of her experiences. Her court is dedicated to the decriminalization and community-based treatment of persons that are arrested with mental illness and co-occurring conditions. And this court has diverted over 21,000 people out of Broward County's jail. And her successful court has become a model both nationally and globally. She's also the author of this incredible book, A Court of Refuge, Stories from Behind the Bench. So good afternoon, Judge Wren, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon, Tracy, and good afternoon to everyone that's joining us here today. First of all, it is an absolute thrill to be with you and to talk about Broward County's mental health court, the first court in the United States, which, by the way, this month is turning 22 years old.
That's incredible. That's
hard to believe, really. Started when I was 12.
Yes, of course, as did I. So your book is called A Court of Refuge, and it speaks again about the first dedicated mental health court, which you do preside over in Broward County. I'm wondering if you could tell us just a little bit about how the court came to be and how you became interested in mental health advocacy.
Well, that's a long story, actually. But first of all, for your viewers who may not know where Broward County is, right. First of all, I'm a county court judge, and I sit in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and Broward County, of course, is my county, and it's a very large county. We've got, I think, close to 2.9 million people.
Wow.
Yes, in Broward. And I came to the bench in 1996. I was sworn in 1997 with some very unique skill sets for a judge. I am a former public guardian for Broward County, and that meant that it was my responsibility through the probate court to basically take care of the health, safety, welfare of individuals that were deemed incapacitated by the court under our guardianship laws in the state of Florida. And these adults were indigent, they were alone, they didn't have any family members, and I was so lucky. It's one of the, I think, most enjoyable positions that I've had. I've had a lot of really wonderful, responsible, unique positions for a lawyer, but in this one, I was a lawyer, I was a director of my own program, there were social workers and other support staff, and under the statute at the time, the ratios of case manager or social worker to client was 1 to 40. We had no money to expand our service model, so I took my own caseload. I was also a de facto social worker, which I think lawyers are.
Yes, absolutely.
And we should be, for the most part. It's a helping profession. And that was for persons with adults with all kinds of disabilities, largely individuals that were advanced in age, but we had persons with intellectual disabilities and, of course, individuals with serious and persistent mental illness, of course, bipolar disorder, disorders. And it was through that work that, ironically, over the course of 10 days, a little metaphysics, I think, or synchronicity thrown in here, that three families, there's so many family members across our nation, in my community that need enormous help.
Yes.
That we don't have enough resources, we don't have enough services, nobody knows what to do. They just don't know what to do or where to get help. And sure enough, over the course of 10 days, 3 different groups of families appeared in my office. Wow. They came unannounced, Tracy. They basically all use the same words.
They were just coming for help.
Someone told us, Ginger, that you could help us. Someone told us that you could help my mother. You could help my son. You could help my daughter, you know, with mental illness, because we can't find help anywhere. And I remember, you know, after the third family and everybody's crying and distraught. Yes. And I met with them, and they're in crisis. And this was 1993. I remember it like it was yesterday.
And in 93, there was very limited resources, let alone in the courts.
Correct. Nothing. Yeah. Nothing. And so I would say, I remember saying to them, you know, first of all, this program is for individuals that do not have family members, because it was a civil guardianship program. Right. And I remember as I walked that last family down this corridor to the elevators, I made like this silent promise to family members and to myself that if I ever got the chance to help these families, I would. 3 weeks later, I get a mysterious call. It's from an attorney who won't divulge on behalf of who he is calling. Right. But the call basically said very simply, listen, there's a new high-profile position in mental health, and this person feels that you would be very good in this role, and are you interested?
Wow.
Well, you know, of course, you know me now.
Right? Here's your opportunity. Yes.
Yeah, here it is. I asked for it and I got it, and I said, yes, I am. And within a month, 2 months later, whatever it was, I was now the plaintiff's monitor of a federal class action consent decree over our regional state psychiatric hospital, South Florida State Hospital, which literally was responsible for almost the entire bottom half of the state of Florida. And it was my responsibility on the ground in the institution on behalf of the plaintiffs, on behalf of the residents. This was a protection and advocacy position, disability rights position. I was also a patent lawyer, and it was my job to be there, live there almost essentially in that state hospital, and protect the rights of my clients in this consent decree. And of course, through that process, which was largely related to deinstitutionalization, I was specially trained by some of our nation's, I think, still most visionary experts in everything from psychiatric rehabilitation to discharge planning to, you name it, consumer rights, and everything you could possibly think of. And it was a transformative role. And of course, I think like most monitors would tell anybody, it comes with a shelf life. And before you knew it, it was time to go for me. And I decided to run for a judgeship. I thought that was a really good fit for me. And I always wanted to run for elected office when I was a little girl. And here we are, came to the bench at a time when my criminal justice system really had an awakening. Yeah. In 1994, I came in 97, but in 1993, 94, and really up until the time I came, they really had gone through a grand jury investigation. It's in the book. It's a brilliant story, a high-profile case. And sure enough, a task force decided it wanted a specialized mental health court. It was what we called quite the leap of faith.
Yeah, that is fantastic. What a serendipitous way to get into a great life's work. You talked a little bit, and we know that there is, in fact, criminalization of people with mental health disorders. I think the statistic is in 44 states, there's 10 times the people in jail than there are in treatment facilities where they can get help. Yeah.
Yes, in prisons.
Can you share with us a little bit about how your mental court, how they've remedied the misplacement of these humans, and how it helps not only our individuals that are appearing in the court, but the family and the community as well?
You know, our goal was very simple, but not so simple. We didn't have any money. We had no funding. In 1989, many of your viewers may be aware that the first drug court was established in the United States. Ironically, it was also in South Florida. It was in Miami-Dade.
I love Florida.
Well, you know, I always say desperation breeds innovation, and we're ranked 49th and 50th in the country and the third largest state in the United States, and we are still, nobody should be fooled or misled in any way. Our state is in critical shape. Even now, we have no Medicaid expansion, but what we did have is we had a courageous community on the mental health side, on the criminal justice side, that had taken two independent parallel systems of care that had never talked to each other, never worked together. But for 2 years, a little bit over 2 years, these major stakeholders had worked together in a task force. And through this task force process, they really couldn't reach consensus, but they did reach shared vision. And their shared vision was they wanted to do something, anything, that would take individuals out of an inappropriate system of care, that being a jail system, and move them to a more appropriate system of care or back home linked with services, and somehow use the court really as a structural, you know, device somehow, an apparatus, if you will, to do this kind of linking, these linkages, and then to use the court process not only for the diversion out of an inappropriate, inhumane jail system, but then use it for other multi-purposes. What would those purposes look like? Well, the first is, you know, we know that our family members need help.
Yeah.
We know that our family members need advocates. We know that they need education. We know that they need somebody. A judge would be, as a champion, for example, is wonderful, to stand up and say enough is enough is enough. And the criminal justice system is not going to participate in this practice anymore. And so I always looked at the court when I first started, because the idea of taking all of these providers now across what we know is a very large county. We had to go cross-agency in our criminal justice system. We had to go cross providers, both in substance and mental health and human services. And we had to basically say to them, listen, we can't give you any money. We have
That's always such a great proposition.
we have nothing to give you, but the idea that together as a community, we are taking a stand. It's bold, it's courageous, it's collaborative, and I'm asking that you share your resources with me, with this court. And they did.
Incredible.
And they did. And we had one of our largest mental health centers, Henderson Behavioral Health Center. I hope they're on the line watching. They lent us staff. You know, it was difficult, because even though we know that there's a revolving door, we know that individuals could be considered clients or patients or consumers, mental health consumers, on one day, and then all of a sudden the next day they're prisoners, they're defendants, they're offenders. And even our own mental health system was siloed, that they were like, well, I don't know, we don't go into the jail. Everybody had to break down their silos. Everybody really needed to step up and collaborate. And I was a little concerned that maybe all of these operational components were too complicated. Maybe I couldn't get the transportation right. You know, who were we really holding accountable?
Right.
And this is the misnomer to your audience, Tracy. The misnomer is everybody thinks we're trying to hold the individual accountable to the adherence for treatment. No, we're trying to hold the system accountable to the people and to the families, because that's what happens when you have scarcity. When you have scarcity, oftentimes there's a lack of accountability and there's no leadership. And that's what our grand jury report in 1994 informed us, that the system was broken, that there was nobody accountable to anyone for anything. And yet here we are in 1997 now, this month, 22 years ago, saying, you know, we gotta try. We have to try something. This is a human rights effort. We are considered a human rights strategy. And in that regard, we have been incredibly successful as a result in not only working together, working rapidly, understanding that we're talking about life and death, understanding
Absolutely.
that suicide is the #1 cause of death in US jails. It's the #3 cause of death in US prisons. And I embedded a clinician as part of my court team so that we would send a message that we didn't want to waste 1 minute longer of having somebody behind bars. We wanted to turn the courtroom into a psychiatric triage, and that we, if people were acutely ill, to the hospital, not committing, but having clinical guidance, and then letting individuals make letting clinicians make their independent evaluation. If somebody needed to go involuntarily, of course, the court, that was an emergency, but the court is voluntary, and really based on principles of dignity and strength, and that the court is a gift. Taking the court, a court of law, a criminal court, and literally turning it inside out and looking at the person in front of you and saying, welcome, and how could I help you?
Yeah, that's an incredible testament to just the power that you can create when people are willing to work together. Like you said, break down the silos, come to common terms, and I can see as you're speaking why you are the model, both nationally and internationally. That's incredible. There's a term that you use in the book, and it's, I think, pronounced therapeutic jurisprudence.
Very good.
If you could tell us exactly what that means. It's a big word for those of us who are not lawyers. And how did it become the bedrock, really, of the mental court in its development?
The mental health court. You know, therapeutic jurisprudence is just an incredible law reform philosophy that, again, you could read more about it in the book, but it was pioneered by two law professors that happened. One that was a professor at the University of Miami College of Law, and then his partner, who happened to become a visiting professor in the late 80s, early 90s. And this was a time when mental health law was first emerging, and mental health law really is principled on human rights and dignity, empowerment, and really self-efficacy and self-determination. And so they took those principles and they really thought about, well, wait a minute, you know, you have a courtroom, and in a courtroom, whether you know it or not, there's really invisible social forces. It's how judges talk. It's
Yes.
what happens in a courtroom. It's fear, it's anxiety. It's the fact that nobody really has a chance to give voice to their own case. Usually it's the lawyers who speak only.
Someone's representing what they're thinking and feeling, yes.
And so they considered a concept and they wrote about it in law review articles and presented on therapeutic jurisprudence, which they recognize is a very difficult term. They kind of regret that name. So they call it TJ. And the idea is, well, wait a minute, what if, where it's appropriate, what if we could bend the legal process to humanize it? What if we could give voice to the people that are before the court? What if the court could be validating? What if we could actually create a courtroom space where people felt that they were listened to, that they were understood, that they were validated, and that the judge really cares about them as individuals, their families, their lives. And so the idea, well, how do you do that? Through soft skills, right? Through active listening, through welcoming, through, softening a traditional process and making it more informal, and through storytelling, letting people, tell me about you. Yeah. Tell me about your vision. What were your dreams? What is it you wanted to do in your life? And by this storytelling, by these beautiful, trauma-informed, strength-based, dignified dialogues, and where we're educating, we're teaching, and we're weaving in the research and the ACE study, we're able to get to a level playing field where people feel that they can trust, that we could break down stigma. Yes. That we can say, wait, there's hope, treatment works. I could share stories of our friends that, have gone on to become back to their lives, their professions, their marriages. What they had dreamed about prior to maybe a diagnosis or the arrest or whatever. Yeah. I don't think that, well, for the families that come into the court, like for the very first time, and maybe it's a first break or they didn't know what was happening and now there's crisis. My team and myself, we spend so much time on behavioral health literacy, on letting them know treatment works. Let's just do it together. You're not alone. It's 1 in 4, it's 1 in 5. This is so common. Yeah. It's just 22 years of really appreciating how tangible and powerful hope is. Yeah, powerful is the right word. And it, as you mentioned stigma, these situations can be so isolating, both for the patient or whoever's in your court and their families. And when you provide them, even just the statistics of you're not alone, you're not the only one, you can move forward, and here are some ways not only that, but the care coordination. I mean, you shouldn't have to be a lawyer. You shouldn't have to need a judge to access healthcare, in our country, and yet we do. I get on the phones, we need this, we need that. Where does this person go? I need an appointment. I mean, we're doing, everything from care coordination to navigation, in addition to dealing with the legal side and the psychosocial side and the trauma-informed side. It's all happening. Why? Because it has to. Yeah. It has to. If we're going to save lives and keep people out of jail and break that revolving door, this is what we have to do. And we do it with absolute joy. Yeah, that's fantastic. Can you walk us through maybe a day in the life of the mental health court? If someone, maybe this is their first visit, what they can expect,
do they need to come in with a diagnosis already in place, or how does that work when they come into your court?
You know, I designed the court along with a colleague of mine that I had worked with during those disability rights days at the state hospital, and we just sat down together, you know, and really really kind of mapped out what we know, and really thinking, you know, time is of the essence. We don't want people, you know, getting trapped in jail. The U.S. Department of Justice back in 1996 had put out statistics, for example, that, you know, people with mental illnesses in jail for the same crime or offense as somebody without a mental illness was actually spending 3 times longer in jail, because judges aren't trained, lawyers aren't trained, nobody knows what to do. I used to pick up a file when we first started, and the file would just stop at a certain point because the judges
no one knew what the next step was. Yeah,
correct. And so, you know, we wanted an open referral system. We wanted a rapid system. Anybody can call my office. It's a misdemeanor court. 2 offenses have been carved out of an administrative order in my jurisdiction. All these models may be different, but it's DUIs and domestic violence cases that were carved out for various reasons by the architects of that. But, you know, an open referral system right into the court. The clinician is right in the court. She's going to privately do her assessments, her screenings right there in the court. Nobody has to come in with anything. I don't want records. I want to preserve confidentiality to the best of that we certainly can. You know, we really are extremely streamlined in what we do, but we're very crisp in what we know, what we are trying to target, and that is first and foremost public safety. Yeah. Also, we're looking to find the sickest of the sick, get them out immediately on emergency basis, and then for everyone else, of course, you know, if they want to participate after we talk about, you know, really give them informed consent, talk about the court, our mission, our goals. We have no standard timelines. We don't want to overburden people. We want them away from the criminal justice system and really linked to care. Why? Because what we found is that people, when they are linked to care and they activate their health and they start to learn how to manage their health, they get well. Yeah. Their life goes on. You know, and people come by and they'll wave and they'll just say, Judge, you know, I just wanted to let you know I'm doing really well and thank you so much. And, you know, we love to know that and hear that. There's a beautiful chapter in the book about Lily. I call her Lily, that comes back 15 years later in a very challenging situation that was so hard to resolve, very complex problem solving, and here she was in a beautiful life, and that's what we want for everybody and all our families.
How rewarding! What a treasure to hear that 15 years later.
Exactly.
You had in somebody's life. So in your court, this is not necessarily the first time they might be introduced to the legal system, but for many of these people, the first time that they're hearing that they might even have a mental health diagnosis.
Yes. You know, it's not the first time for most actually, that they have had encounters or that they've been justice involved. But, you know, for many, it may be the first time that they get referred, even though, you know, for whatever reason. But we also, of course, I think, you know, some of the toughest hearings, had a couple this past week, where it's a first break, and the families are absolutely in shock. Everybody's in shock, and we've got the tissue boxes, and I'm drawing charts and, you know, pie charts about treatment planning from the, you know, just diagram, you know, and getting people appointments immediately and calling them back to make sure, because, you know, it's process. We want to make sure that they're being provided what they need. So the court becomes a lever, again, not so much for the person, but of course, but also for the community. The community literally stood up and said, yeah, we want to be held accountable, meaning it doesn't mean that there's not tensions. You know, there's always tensions in a system, but how we work together, how these relationships are so important. You know, relationships, I remember so million years ago, sitting on the President's New Freedom Commission on Mental Health and listening, you know, to the amazing, you know, First Lady Rosalind Carter at a dinner one night talk about the pricelessness of the currency of relationship, that there is nothing more important than the relationship we have with the stakeholders in our community and the alliances and the networks that we build. And she is so right, so right. It's everything.
Speaking of relationships and how some of that works, what is the role of law enforcement in the court? Can they request or assist someone getting a court date if they suspect that someone needs that assistance?
You know, we've had very minimal law enforcement contact in the court. Not that, you know, we finally, when the court started, we didn't have a CIT program. We had no political will at the time for CIT, and I think if we did, CIT would have been the first diversionary model that our community would have implemented. But we didn't have that, and so the court was the first line of defense. CIT, for your listeners, I know you know this, but I'm also a professor, so
yes,
I have to teach psycho, as I am at Nova Southeastern University Graduate Schools, in forensic psychology and criminal justice. And, you know, CIT is what's called a pre-booking model. And if you're looking at your sequential intercept maps, that's 0 and 1. And problem-solving diversionary courts basically are post-booking models as well as post-adjudicatory, and that's your sequence 2 if you're looking at as a sequential intercept map for those that are interested in that. And so, you know, but we have had some really, really fabulous interaction on a few cases with CIT officers that they pretty much felt that they've exhausted all of their, they did their due diligence in the community, that nobody was arrested, but they had already been arrested at the time. For example, they had a case, they'd been working on a number of cases, and there have been a couple of very complicated cases that we worked in tandem, you know, through that referral source, if you will.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I know when we started, you stated that this is, in fact, the court's 22nd year. So congratulations on that. And I'm really interested just to hear what your experience has provided, the lessons that you've learned, your vision for the future of mental health in America, and really, where do you think we need to go?
Thank you. You know, I'm so pleased that we gave this, you know, this title of A New Vision, because I think that we were talking, you know, earlier briefly before we started, and I wanted to say, and for those that are on Twitter, that I post often about this, but that I am just a huge fan of Wellbeing Trust and their incredible report, Pain in the Nation. I urge everyone. It's the Time magazine just wrote about it this past week, but it was actually published in 2017 or 2018, and it's extraordinary. And the reason why it's so extraordinary to me is because it really sets that sense of urgency. It takes a very, very broad visionary approach, and that is that, you know, we want to really start, which we always have in the mental health court, with recovery with vision first. I always say endings are beginnings, but what are
vision and
our
hope
endings?
and yes,
Right, endings are beginnings in mental health court. What did you want to be? What did you want to do? And we've talked so long about recovery. I think that the President's New Freedom Commission, published in 2003, was the first time that recovery was ever a centerpiece of a national policy report issued by a presidential commission on a federal level. And yet here we are, you know, we're 20 plus years, whatever, and we still don't have structured off-ramps, you know, to our public mental health system, where people now, you know, they know how to manage their health, they've got their, you know, they've activated their health, they're doing well, they've got case managers, they've even got peers. And yet we don't have investment. We don't have investment in structured pathways to, you know, our potential, to our purpose. And, you know, from a social determinants of health vantage point, people that I see, whether it's in my I also have regular criminal division in addition to my mental health court, because that's part-time. I do a very small part-time drug court too, but in my regular criminal division, I have always applied those principles of therapeutic jurisprudence to that court. The attorneys know they could take a traditional approach, they could take a therapeutic approach, but it wasn't really until I really started looking at poverty, I really started looking at social determinants of health, where you live, where you age, correct, where you're born. You know, what is it that we really need to do in order to help you overcome barriers in health equity and education, you know, and being able to get linked with, you know, with partnerships for jobs, supported employment. We really must invest, I think, in these off-ramps. Seriously, not just talk about them, because I think we've been talking about them for a very long time.
yes.
And we know the lesson is that we know that recovery is real. We know that treatment works. I know that we know there's a lot of doom and gloom. I know that budgets, you know, we're always doing more with less. But really, I know I'm an optimist, but I'm also a realist, or else I would never have done this work to begin with. And I think that it's time for us to really cross that criminal justice chasm, that we really need to not rely on a backdoor of law enforcement and criminal justice. We have to call mental health what it is. It's health. And that when people have a crisis in health, we don't call police officers. We
right.
call paramedics.
Yes.
You know, we don't have people going, you know, being transported in marked police units. We have ambulances. We have mobile crisis units, to our credit, in many cities, in many communities. We have one mental health center that serves our entire county with a mobile crisis unit. That's all we have. And so we really need, I think, to take the institutional knowledge that we do have.
Yeah.
And to recognize that we know we need to scale up, but we need policymakers, you know, that are willing to embrace mental health and public health, just like they embrace any other part of their roles and responsibilities as policymakers.
Yeah.
Policymakers love economic development, but we can't have thriving cities and communities if we don't have our health. And that includes behavioral health. So it's really that vision that I really have been so inspired by A Pain in the Nation, by Wellbeing Trust, by all of these health providers across the nation that are understanding that they have to invest in health outside of traditional healthcare systems. That Kaiser Permanente, for example, as an example, is investing, you know, millions of dollars in housing. Why? Housing is health.
Right.
That states are using Medicaid dollars very creatively for wraparound services to support people in housing, for reentry services. And so I just believe very strongly that we need to change the conversation, that our conversation for all these decades, they're important, but maybe we need to up the stakes.
Change it up a little bit and
raise the bar,
yes,
so to speak, and really talk about really investing in purpose, investing in navigators now that aren't just linking people to mental health providers, but linking people to colleges and linking people, you know, to vocational schools, walking them into advisor's office, sitting with them, you know, helping them get financial aid, making sure that they understand the Americans with Disabilities Act, making sure they know that they are entitled to individualized educational plans. You know, I really feel there's another world, there's a whole nother half of systems of care now that we're ready for and that we need to plan for, design, and start implementing.
Yeah, and I love that we're ready for it now. We were talking briefly before we broadcasted that we've done some good work on prevention and crisis care and continuing the reduction of stigma, and now we need these off-ramps, as you call them, for people that are well, that are stable, that are ready to move forward, and they just don't know how. And
well, I just think the world has gotten so complicated. I mean, I can't do anything without, you know, calling this one and saying, you know, now we have to work strategically. I think we're all, when we really think about it, we all have our informal teams, don't we? Absolutely. You know, we all have to figure out, well, how do we work all this, and how do we communicate with this, and how do we apply for that? And how do we fill in these fields, and what is it they're looking for? And, you know, I just feel information now is different. The way we operate, the way we all function is so different now with technology. And I just feel that strategic teams now is how we all work, whether we really realize it or we don't.
yes.
And I know I have mine, you know, for various.
We all need a village.
Right, for various.
Even after we've raised children, we need a village.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, and I feel very strongly that, you know, we're all in a different place now, and I think our systems of care are still operating that like they have been back in the 90s, you know, in the early 2000s, but we're not really there. You know, and people are getting, the good news is, you know, we have first episode teams, and we've got peer supports, and we've got, you know, these incredible ACT teams, and if you can get linked to the right kind of care, and it's qualitative, and it's vibrant, and it's welcoming, and it's trauma informed, and if we can just get to our kids early and have, right, and really have our, I just came from Scotland last several months ago, and in Scotland, they were very interested in therapeutic justice and really what they called presiding with kindness. How do you humanize the law? And they're starting an ACEs Nation there in their schools, and they're really, really, you know, leading the way, that their whole country now is going to be based from a trauma-informed, you know, philosophy. You know, that's going to take them a very long way in prevention. And we know that the state of California has, you know, a few months ago just brought on their first Surgeon General that is also, you know, an expert in adverse childhood experiences and trauma, Dr., you know, Nadine Burke-Harris. So, I hope I didn't mix up that name. And so, but my point being, and she's so fabulous from Stanford, but my point being is we're really in all these, you know, we're getting there. It's not necessarily linear, but I do think that from a social determinants of health vantage point, all of us have a role to play. All of us need to help, you know, get that message out. that treatment works, that there is no shame, that mental health is essential to all health. And that it's so important to move into that next paradigm, that we could really bring our families out of all of this angst, terror, pain, suffering, and start to really get systems that are evidence-based, community-based. Not to say that people don't need hospitals. Nobody's saying that from time to time. Nobody. But that we do deserve excellence in behavioral health.
Absolutely. We talk here at the foundation about the fact that we can get together with our friends and we have no problem talking about indigestion or diabetes or our migraine headaches or what have you as part of physical health. And it's just a normal part of our conversations. But when it comes to our mental wellness, sometimes for a myriad of reasons, we don't get it out. And then people can't help us because they don't know what's going on. So
that's right. Talking about it is the first step. And, I'm so grateful. I was just saying somewhere that I was doing a presentation. I'm so grateful for everybody that's speaking up, all our celebrities and Lady Gaga and Kanye West and Kid Cudi and everybody that's just normalizing this conversation and in their own space helping everybody understand that it's everything. If you don't have your mental health, whether you're a judge, a lawyer, a doctor, all of us, everybody, we can't thrive. Our families can't thrive. Our communities can't thrive. And so years ago, for example, I decided in our mental health court, I'm going to declare the court a zero suicide prevention court. Why? Because I realized I was never using the word suicide in the courtroom. I wasn't normalizing the conversation, and we're in the middle of a major suicide epidemic.
Right.
And so, to normalize these conversations, as you say, is so important. I'm so proud, of everybody that tells their story. And before you know it, you're right. It's like, I had a sore throat.
Yeah. Every one of us has mental health. We all have it, whether it's a diagnosis or not.
We're living in this world. Right.
So let's talk about it and
let's
help
talk about it.
Yeah.
Right. Let's talk about it, and let's really bring our worlds to parity, and really bring excellence to our nation and all Americans and everybody really. Healthcare really, in my view, is a human right, and that's how it should be treated.
Well, thank you so much just for your spirit of hope, of optimism, for your belief in reform and recovery, and really that people can have a powerful, productive,
Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you for having me. And it's not a shameless plug. It's really really important. This is a teaching tool for family members. It's a teaching tool for everybody. So please, A Court of Refuge, Stories from the Bench of America's First Mental Health Court. This is from Beacon Press, just an incredibly prestigious publisher. I'm so grateful for Beacon Press, but together we can make change. And
we have it too. I was going to do a non-shameless plug if you didn't have a choice.
Thank you.
I'd like to take a few minutes. If anybody has questions for Judge Wren, you can send them. If you're watching on Facebook Live, you can send them that way, or you can use the question and answer box on your Zoom session. We have just a few more minutes, so if there's something you would like to ask Judge Wren, please type it in the box now. Okay, our first question is, do you have any recommendations on how to help someone who is afraid or doesn't understand the court? How to get them there if there's any reluctance?
If they're afraid?
Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, it's not a bad idea if you're in a community and there is somebody from a NAMI group or somebody, that somebody trusts from a peer support group that would go with them. We had NAMI representatives for many, many, many years based in the courtroom. And so they would actually bring them to court. And I think that when you're going with someone, like if you're afraid to go to the doctor, I'm always afraid to go
or
to
the dentist, or
touche. Going with someone you trust, that they'll say you're going to be okay, really all of that, I think is very helpful.
Thank you. Do you know the number or approximate number of mental health courts in the U.S. Other than Broward?
Well, I'm not really so sure that there's an accurate count anymore. For years now, they've been saying, there's like 400 mental health courts in the U.S. I kind of can say I think there's many more than that. The mental health courts, together with the drug courts, have also been the springboard for veterans courts. And, now with integration of health, now there's all kinds, fortunately, of hybrid courts on the juvenile level, on the adult level, and doing just really incredible things. So it's, they're getting incredibly popular problem-solving courts in general. And I think that also on the civil side, if we look at the civil side for a second, we've got safe baby courts that are also, early childhood development courts and juvenile dependency behavioral health courts. And so I think that we're kind of in this moment where it's really hard to do an accurate accounting. Sure, because the paradigm, is so accelerated now that problem-solving courts and smart justice has become so popularized across the United States and in many states.
Great, thank you. The next question is from someone that is active with the Foundation for Suicide Prevention. She's participating in one of their overnight fundraisers. But she says much of their funding is for preventative support and survivor support. And the real need, she feels, is to combat stigma of mental illness. And she's asking, what suggestions do you have to do this publicly, especially with regard to public health crisis of suicide? How can we promote that?
I think that's such a great question. And first of all, I sit on the executive committee of the National Action for Suicide Prevention. So that's a subject, of course, very dear to my heart. And, I actually think that we're doing a good job of not only educating the public about suicide prevention. I think that we can do a better job of gaining empirical research and really moving upstream in terms of treatment and supports and services that we really need, because I think that's my informal view is, and listening to other experts, is that we're still, we're really at this midst that just today or yesterday, the research, the data, the new report is not good. It is not good. We have not gotten on the other side of this crisis, not by a long shot. And so it's imperative, I think, that every single person know that they have a role to play in suicide prevention, that we have this wonderful, there's a wonderful ad campaign, Seize the Awkward, that tells everybody, talk, ask people, how are they feeling? Know the facts, know the signs, know the resources, don't be afraid. Let people know that you're there. The Veterans Administration has the Be There campaign, and I think that, that's how we overcome stigma, and we just have to keep working really hard together. I think, we're really, I think we have a lot of traction.
Yeah. And I know for myself, sometimes asking that question when you're first starting off in this support role, it can be scary.
It can.
To say, are you thinking of hurting
It
yourself?
can. It was for me too.
And it takes practice.
You just, you know, you have to get desensitized. And I'd sit there in court, and, you know, and I'm like, well, let's talk. Any suicide attempts, you know, people actually, I think, are relieved, you know, to talk about it. They want to talk about it. And we know the data, we know the research. Talking about it is not a driver to suicide, you know, and so it's very empowering to you know, break that ice, I think, and start talking.
Yeah, let's talk to each other.
Yep.
Well, Judge Wren, again, thank you so much for your time. I know you're a very busy lady. I was teasing you earlier that you probably never sleep, in which
Yeah, I pretty much concurred with that.
Yeah, thank you very much for spending time with us this afternoon. And again, for the viewers, pick up the book, The Court of Refuge. It's very informative with this type of information.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you for all your viewers for tuning in. And you can follow me on Twitter at Judge Wren. And thank you so much. It's really been an honor.
Thank you so much. Everyone be well.